You are listening to I Am Refocused Radio with your host, Shamaya Reed. This show is designed to inspire you to live your purpose and regain your focus. And now, here's your host, Shamaya Reed.
Hey, welcome to I Am Refocused Radio. We are here once again with our special guest for tonight. We're going to talk to Lynn Barrett. She is going to talk to us about DID. This is going to be a very educational topic for all of us to learn more about disorders and how it plays roles in people's lives and how they cope with it. And she is not just going to talk about that. She's also going to help us learn everything that we need to know. You can go to her website, lynnbarrett.com. But right now, I want to welcome you, Lynn, to the show and say, first of all, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. It's really nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
And thank you for being here. I'm going to be a student. We talked in the green room about this, how I'm going to learn about this. So first and foremost, what is DID? What does that stand for? And how does that play a role in people's lives who have to cope with it?
So DID stands for Dissociative Identity Disorder. And that is a mental health condition that is most often caused by chronic early childhood trauma. And when I was diagnosed with it a century ago, no, that was really 1992. But when I was diagnosed with it, it was called multiple personality disorder. And then about 2 years later, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, the DSM from the American Psychiatric Association, renamed it to be Dissociative Identity Disorder. If you would like me to explain what dissociation is, and then a little more about the disorder, I would be happy to do that.
Definitely, the floor is yours.
When I talk about dissociation, I like to tell people that we all dissociate, that if you're sitting in a lecture hall and listening to a boring professor, but you're sitting by the window and you're looking at the kids playing soccer outdoors, your mind temporarily leaves your body and gets out of that lecture hall and goes out into the field, and you're with those kids, you come back again, because you can't stay there. But that's sort of a temporary separation of your mind and your body. It also happens when we're doing repetitive activities or we're bored, we're doing the same thing over and over again. We daydream, our mind goes somewhere else and our body is right here, and we come back again. And that's a very normal function of the body. Because dissociation is a mind-body split, it can also be used unconsciously for protection. So that soldiers on the battlefield will often dissociate the horrors of war while they're there on the battlefield, but they bring it back with them in PTSD as dissociation continues to sort of play havoc with their minds. And women who have been raped will often dissociate, so that full impact of the horror they're experiencing, they can be relieved of that a little bit, but then they come back and that dissociation will follow them around. So it is a normal body-mind function, but it's used for protection. What happens is when a small child experiences trauma over and over again and has no way to escape from it, the small child has to find some way to cope with this experience. And so they dissociate. And if it happens often enough, that dissociation can sort of embody itself into another part of them or personality. And let me explain that a little bit more. So particularly if the person who is hurting them is a parent or a parent figure or a neighbor or a family member that they just have no way to get away from, this is more likely to happen. And if you imagine that a child is more or less helpless and depends on these people for their livelihood. What they do is a part of them doesn't even realize they're being abused. That gets sort of cordoned off in their mind, and so they can go back and be just the normal little child with this parent figure. But there's another part of them that will hold that memory or that emotion or that experience of abuse. And so it's actually a very functional thing for the child to do in order to be able to survive. But as we grow up and become adults, it's not functional anymore. And so it becomes very confusing for the person who has it. And it takes quite a long time to heal from that from that condition. So I guess I would just sort of wrap that explanation up with the fact that DID is functional in the moment, just like dissociating during rape or war is functional in the moment, but then it doesn't remain functional when you go back into society. And so children will find a way to partition off memories so that they can manage and survive. And so that's why we call it dissociative identity disorder. And it is also why it used to be called multiple personality disorder, because we have different parts of us who are not always aware the other parts are there. And so that's why it becomes very confusing when we become adults.
With your experience, when did you find out that you were diagnosed with this, and how did that make an impact with your career and your everyday to-day life?
Well, thank you for asking that question. It was a long process for me, and it tends to be a fairly long process for most people. I will say that I speak for myself only, and other people's experiences may be a bit different, but most of us have commonalities in how this happens. So in my case, I thought I was a happy wife and mother. But when I was about 35 years old, I started to decompensate. All of my coping skills started to disappear. I didn't feel like I was real. I didn't feel like I was me. Sometimes I would feel like I was in the corner of the ceiling looking down on this wretched woman who was going through life. I had body pain everywhere. I would have multiple voices in my head, or streams of thoughts going on at a time. Often I would just roll up into a fetal position in bed. And my emotions and my thinking really didn't match. They were sort of, it was just like my mind could understand A, B, C, and D, but my emotions were taking me down to X, Y, and Z. And so there was no continuity or congruity between my mind and my emotions. And that went on for about a 10-year period. I would say that I was suicidal. I had suicidal ideation. I attempted suicide once. I went into the hospital for 30 days. I was, it created a veil or a sort of I'll call it a veil between myself and my children. I was having trouble reaching them because I couldn't get through that veil that was between us. I want to say at the very same time that this was happening to me at home, I was a teacher and I would go into work and I did a great job and I felt great and I was totally competent. So I could do things at work, but I would fall apart at home. Over this 10-year period, and I will say it sort of culminated in that 30 days in the hospital, when I came out, I moved. I got a different job. I moved to a different city, and I needed to look for a new therapist. And I just sort of accidentally found one who had experience with DID, and I had already started meeting parts of myself, but I didn't know what that meant. It was totally confusing, and I thought I was crazy. But when I would go to my therapist, she didn't think I was crazy at all. And so she really walked me through this healing process. The healing process itself for me took about 10 years. I think it takes a lot longer for some people. But I would also say that even now, I'm not entirely healed. I'm not fully healed. I am mostly integrated. I'm getting ahead of myself. We met probably 20 or more altars. The DSM says that in order to qualify to be DID, you have to have at least 2 fully formed altars, and you have to have some form of amnesia. And so I qualified for all of those, and I had at least 20 altars and maybe more, some fragments, and I mostly integrated about 20 years ago. I'm 75 years old now. I mostly integrated about 20 years ago, but even today, in the process of writing my memoir, that was not a problem for me at all. That was really healing to do that. I loved writing my memoir, but in publishing it, exposing myself and experiencing the pushback from family and so on and so forth, that sort of threw me open again. And I have met another altar that I didn't even know existed. So I'm like mostly integrated, but I want to say there's, nobody is ever fully integrated, most likely. And when we integrate, all that means is that the memories that my altars have are the same memories that I have, and they understand everyone else's memories. And so we can all function as one whole person instead of different parts that have different emotions and different body memories and different narrative memories. So we function as one. The parts technically don't really go away because that's the way my brain was formed when I was a small child. But I almost never experience them. They almost never come out or say anything, whereas that certainly wasn't true during that period of my intense experience of decompensation and then reconstruction of who I was. So I do lead a really happy and healthy life now, but it was a long, hard slog, and it is for most people. It's extremely painful. We often feel like we don't belong. We can feel a lot of terror and fear about nothing in particular, but we're just afraid something's going to happen. Trying to think what else I was going to say. So we carry these kinds of feelings with us, and that's the work that we do in therapy. In therapy, we first of all, we get to know ourselves and all the parts of ourselves. Our therapist is not only willing to work with my other parts, but invites them forward, because if they don't get to talk, they're not going to heal, right? So our parts are a part of us, and they have to have equal airtime. And so that's the kind of therapeutic work we do. We work with the shame, we work with the fear and the terror. And then we discover that we're safe. We're so you have to remember, a lot of these parts are very tiny. They're little kids still inside of us, so they still think that we're back in the past. So we have to bring them into the present and say, listen, I'm an adult now, and I'm going to take care of you, and you're not going to get hurt, and you're safe now. And so really it's really kind of a very long, hard love affair of learning how to love who you are and love your parts. And then, being able to let go of the abuse that we experienced and create a new life and move forward. And so that's where I am now. I am very happily married after a very ugly divorce many, many years ago. And I am now a retired school teacher, school principal, and pastor. I was a pastor. I went to seminary and was ordained and was a pastor for 10 years before I fully retired. And so I in this period of time of the last, I want to say the last 10 years, is I've been working on my memoir and publishing my memoir. And I also speak in a variety of settings. And I think one of the things that I find most rewarding and maybe most important is that I've created a group of people with dissociative disorders. We call ourselves dissociative writers, and we have writing workshops every week. Some of the writing workshops are driven by prompts, and some of the writing workshops are we submit our writing in advance and people get to read it and give feedback. And this has been quite wonderful for me to see, because it has drawn so many people who are ordinarily very, very isolated, because we don't talk about this. It's got a lot of stigma to it. So you don't announce it at your workplace, and you probably don't even tell your next door neighbors. And here it gives them a safe place to come and to share writing that often is from the deepest place that they have. And so while our writing workshops are not therapy, I think that they have a very helpful therapeutic component to them, in that we learn to trust each other, we learn to trust ourselves, and we learn to trust our writing and our stories. So I'm so grateful that I'm here today, and that I am happy and healthy, and no longer racked by pain, no longer racked by fears, and living a relatively normal life, if there is such a thing, and really helping other people as they are entering in the writing process too, on their healing journeys.
Once again, listen to I Am Refocused Radio, talking to our guest, Lynn Barrett. And when people read your book, because it came out earlier this year, Crazy Reclaiming Life from the Shadow of Traumatic Memory, DID, dissociative disorder, is something that really can bring people together. And what I mean by that is people listening to this can learn how they can help someone who is going through this, or if they find out they themselves is going, have to go through this if they're diagnosed or whatever. But what I'm getting at is, what are some of the best ways, if someone knows someone or finds out someone is having this disorder, what are some of the best ways that they can help them without being offensive and without being disrespectful?
Well, that's a great question. And I'm so glad you said without being offensive or disrespectful, because all of us can sometimes misjudge that sometimes. And so it's so important when we're talking about any mental illness to be sensitive to that. So we mentioned earlier in the show that it's much more prevalent than people think it is, that according to, I think it's 2016 Harvard Review study, that probably between 1 and 5% of the worldwide population has dissociative identity disorder, because it is a I want to say, although it isn't normal, it is a normal way for children to respond when they're experiencing chronic childhood trauma. And unfortunately, we often don't want to believe that there's all that much childhood trauma out there, but there is. And our children are really the victims in all of this. So I say that because if you are in a church and there are 100 people in your church, it's likely that anywhere between 1 and 5 of the people in that church have either diagnosed or undiagnosed DID. That kind of hits you between the eyes when you think about that, right? It usually takes people between 7 and 10 years before they get an accurate diagnosis. And that was certainly true for me because I had been going to different kinds of therapy for 10 years before I had an accurate diagnosis. They had tried all kinds of medications on me and nothing worked. It didn't help. And so I want to just say that there are just simply more people out there than we realize who have DID. If you believe that someone does, or if you know someone does, the most important thing that you can do is just be a friend. Just be a friend and be respectful and take your cues from them because we are, sometimes we don't know what's going on inside of us either. Sometimes it's difficult to be a friend of someone with DID because people with DID don't trust easily. And we also have protectors inside who can, on occasion, be difficult to deal with. So if you are a friend of someone with DID, you also need to have clear boundaries for yourself, what you can accept and what you can't accept. I certainly always encourage the person to be in trauma-informed therapy. Sometimes people think they can wing this on their own, and they can't. It's far too difficult and ingrained inside of us to be able to do it without really skilled help to lead us through the path. The good news is that it really is treatable through therapy. And if you look at me, I'm a happy person, and I no longer am experiencing those awful symptoms of DID. So I want to remind people, as awful as it may feel right now, that with the right kind of therapy, that you can heal, and that you can become the person that you were really meant to be. Your DID is not your fault. Your DID happened. It was your protective way of surviving a unfathomable childhood. But now that you're an adult, it is your responsibility to do the work so that you can sort of navigate your way through all that. And come out on the other side as a person who can be a part of intimate relationships, who can be compassionate, kind, and loving, who can be productive in the work setting. All of those things are possible for all of us, but it takes a lot of work. So if you are a friend or a family member, again, encourage your DID friend to get into good therapy and to do the work and set boundaries yourself so that you're okay when you're in relationship with this person.
Once again, talking to our special guest, Lynn Barrett, and you listen to Refocused Radio. With DID, dissociative identity disorder, there are treatment centers, and with your personal experience, would you suggest people talk to their doctors first, or just go straight to, a center? What's that process like? And I know we're going to wrap up soon, but what's that? I think that's very important for the interview. What's that process like?
Well, it's actually hard for me to answer that because it is very hard sometimes, number one, for people to get the right diagnosis, and then also to find a therapist who can do the kind of work with them that needs to be done, and to find the right kind of a treatment center. I was in the hospital. It was actually quite a positive experience, but I know many people who've gone into the hospital who've had terrible experiences. So I guess what I want to say is to be persistent. You are absolutely right that there are places out there that are treatment centers that can be very, very helpful. Do your research and make sure that they're familiar with dissociative disorders and that they're willing to work with them. In the same way, look for a therapist who either has experience with dissociative disorders or is willing to learn, is very open to that. And more therapists are, but it's still a fairly new area for therapists to get into. I want to say that we've had about 30 really good years of research on trauma and trauma-induced conditions like DID. So the research is out there, but the clinicians are still getting it under their belts. Whether you go to a clinician first or a treatment center first is, really going to be based on what your situation is. It's probably better to start with a clinician so that you can maintain some semblance of your regular life. But if you are feeling suicidal or otherwise wanting to harm yourself or others, it's really important for you to get into some kind of a center that will help you stabilize. And I'll say this just really quickly because I know that we're close to the end. But treatment covers many, many years, but it has 3 stages. The first is really stabilization and bringing yourself back from the brink. And that is so important, is to find stabilization. The second aspect of treatment is to do all of that memory work, all of the work around relationships and trust and shame and all of that. You need to do that work. That's the second stage. And then the third stage is actually rebuilding your life. You've come a long way, but your life may not be where you want it to be. And now that you have more emotional energy to put towards that, then you can rebuild it in the way that you know you're supposed to do that. It's a very hard road to walk, but it's so fulfilling, and you can heal from this.
Well, once again, you've been listening to Refocused Radio, talking to our special guest for today, Lynn Barrett. And you can go to her website, lynnbarrett.com, to learn more about her. And also, you also have a website for the group that you work with for writers workshops and also learning courses and classes, dissociativewriters.com. So people can connect with you there. And if someone is a writer and they want to be inspired by you, do you offer any coaching or anything, or is that part of the classes?
Well, I don't offer individual coaching, but I do have a memoir class. And then we coach one another in the writers' workshops. So never thought of that. But I have to admit that at the age of 75, I'm not sure that I want to get into individual coaching. But maybe who knows? Maybe that's the next step for me.
Yeah, like the writers' coach. I mean, that could be another extended part of your service. But once again, I want to say thank you for taking time in your super busy schedule talking to Refocused Radio, and just thank you for sharing your experience with us.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate being on your show, and I want to thank your listeners as well for tuning in. Thank you.